Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again to one of our garden series program. Today, we are going to be presenting uh, harvesting five main crops and seed saving. We have today with us Dr. Bodhi Panisi from the University of Georgia, and she will be our guest presenter for today. Dr. Panisi, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you for the invitation. It's always fun to talk about seeds and seed starting. And so today I wanted to just briefly go over some things that we do as far as seed saving, some of the techniques, explain a little bit about the different kinds of seeds, and then go over some techniques of how to extract seeds, and then a little bit more details on how to store properly the seed so that you can have good longevity and ensure that you'll have healthy plants starting for next season. So first, to start off, there are a couple of things we need to go over to understand what the plants are that we're working with. When it comes to vegetables and even some of the cultivated herbs, a lot less so, but the vegetables in particular, they come in two broad categories: open pollinated and F1 hybrids. And let me explain a little bit what I mean about those two terms. Open pollinated crops are the ones that are either self-pollinating or cross-pollinating. In other words, what needs to happen for the seed to be set is for that flower to either interact with another flower or to stay within itself, and that's what is going to set the seed so that you can have a harvest. So these are self-pollinating and cross-pollinating. In the self-pollinating ones, these examples are peas and beans, tomatoes and peppers. They are the easiest ones to save the seed from. And then the cross-pollinating ones are requiring a little bit more work because they have to be isolated. And those are the brassicas, corn, carrots, beets, squash, cucumbers, and melons. And the hybrid is something that we talk a lot about. And whenever you purchase a pack of seeds that is a hybrid seed, this will be on the label. It will be either hybrid or F1 hybrid, but something will let you know that this is a hybrid seed. And a hybrid seed is produced by offspring or a cross between two parent varieties. And they have been lines that have been specifically designed and carefully monitored so that they don't produce seeds. And then once they have been deemed at the proper time to cross, that's the crossing that will produce the F1 hybrid. The F1 hybrid is the seed that you purchase in that bag, and it has particular traits that they have been selected for. The two parents line have been selected, and that kind of seed is going to bring those traits in the crop that you grow that season. However, if you try to collect the seed from those plants and try to grow those, you will have a variety of different kinds of traits that will be expressed in the offspring. It will very likely not be what you planted in as F1. So that's the reason why hybrid seed is usually a little bit more expensive, because again, it requires quite a bit of preparation to get that cross going, to harvest the seed, and then get it to the consumer. With plant selection, unlike self-pollinating plants, cross-pollinating plants, and those are the ones that we talked about, brassicas, those are the kale, cabbage, that's what we mean by brassicas, corn, carrots, beets, squash, cucumbers, and melons. Those are the ones that need to receive pollen. Usually comes from wind, but a lot of times it's by insects. And those insects, those agents, bring a little bit of pollen, which is the male part of the plant, onto the female part of the plant, and gets that germ, and that germination proceeds from the pollen, and a egg that is part of the female part of the flower will then be combining with the pollen, the germinating pollen, and will form the seed. And this is requirement for that plant to actually trigger the formation of the fruit and then the developing seed inside. And what you're looking at here are the whole thing that I just mentioned. The squash bees, which are specialist pollinators bees that you will always have whenever you're growing squash in your garden. They are very busy bees. They're coming in the blooms, they're brushing against the male part of the plant, of the flower, and they're bringing into another part that has the female part of the flower, which you see right here in the center, and they're taking a little bit of nectar in the in between so that they can keep flying around. So those are bees that you're seeing right there. They're going all the way deep into the bloom. They tap a little bit on the nectar that is at the base of the flower, and they go off to pollinate another flower. And once that process has been set, you're going to start developing that fruit, and then you'll have the good harvest. But in order for this to happen, you'll actually do need pollinators, and in order for that fruit to be set at the right rate. Let's go over a little bit on what types of fruits and the seeds that come inside. So we have three types of fruits, and then we also call it seed because the seed may be a part of the fruit and may not be able to be separated. And in other cases, you may be able to separate those two. So with fleshy fruits, examples of those are tomatoes, berries, figs. You have the seeds enclosed in something fleshy. That's the part that we consume, and then we usually just take on the seed along with us. Same thing with the birds or any animal that eats those berries. They will actually take the entire seed in. Dry fruits, for example, the grains and the grasses, what's interesting about them is in that case, the fruit wall merges with the seed, and therefore you cannot separate that from the seed itself. And then finally, you have dry pods or flowers, and those are examples of like the beans and basils, where you have something that is going to dry out, and then it will release the seeds, or it will hold the seed inside for you to release it. Again, beans, I have a radish flower here that is showing you one that will not release the seed unless you actually break it, and or something else happens to that to crush it, and the seeds will then fall out and be released. A little bit on the fermentation process. Whenever you have fresh fruit that you need to work with in order to extract the seed, we go through a process of fermentation to remove certain germination inhibiting substances that are present in the seed coat. And this happens with tomatoes. I'll show you later on an example of another example with a tomatillo. The process of fermentation mimics really the natural process that takes place as the fruit is ingested by an animal and it passes through the gut. And that is something that we are trying to replicate and speed up in our process of extracting the seed. This process increases germination and also can kill some of the seed-borne pathogens, which would be otherwise damaging to your seed. This fermentation process is required for tomatoes and cucumbers. The seeds are placed along with the pulp in a container. We add a little bit of water to that pulp mixture, only if it's a little bit too thick to be able to be stirred. We put the container in a warm location, anywhere between 72 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit is a good location for it. Stir that fermenting mixture a couple of times a day to introduce some oxygen, which is needed for the yeast in that mixture to start working and to get through the fermentation process faster. It can take anywhere between 48 to 72 hours. A little bit of white mold may show up on the surface of that mash. It may be a little gross, but it's not harmful, and you can be stirring it right back in. Closely monitor the seed for sprouting. If you do see sprouting, the seed has soaked too long, so that's not a good seed anymore. So make sure that you do not go over that seeding, that soaking time. If the gel around the seeds, that is that kind of slick mucilage that you feel once you pull a seed out of the tomato. Once that gel is gone, then that process has been finished. So in other words, all the processes of breaking that gel have completed, and you can then proceed with extracting the seed. This is what the fermentation process looks like. Here's a little bit of tomato with some of that mold forming on the surface. Again, stir it up inside, it will not be a problem. And then you also have the beginning of this on the right, where you have a cucumber, looking like a cucumber seed, where we're extracting it at the beginning and mixing it with some water. You start seeing a little bit of bubbles. That's the carbon dioxide that is being released, and this is the initiation of that fermentation process. Once that is complete, then you make sure you rinse very good with running water. And those are some examples of holding the seed with something secure that they will not wash off. But things like depending on the size, how many seeds you're processing, a little tea strainer would be sufficient, but any colander, metal colander with closed mesh especially for small seed, would be helpful. And just press the water several times, mix in, you can use your hands. But again, the seeds on the right, the picture on the right is showing you that there's a little bit of that gel still around the seeds, while the picture on the left is showing you that those seeds are probably quite clear of that gel. And once you have the seeds, they are still wet. Of course, they have been sitting. You need to dry them. This is really important part of the ensuring the longevity of that seed, is to remove that moisture as much as possible from the seed. Pat the bottom of the strainer with cloth towel, let dry for several hours. Make sure you spread them on plastic, glass, or ceramic plate to dry, not paper or even wax paper. Use a non-sticking material so that they release a lot easier. Spread the seed. Sometimes you can go with something a little bit more mechanically advanced, such as dryer. You can put a seed, usually one single layer and a little bit of space in between. When you have a layer that has holes, it allows some air to come from the bottom, and it speeds up the process. But you don't need to have a dryer in order to dry those seeds again. Airy and dry location, an air-conditioned room is faster in removing the moisture from the seed. Just recognize that any kind of environment that has more humidity in the air is going to slow down the process of removal of water from the seeds. So the drier it is, the better it is, and the faster that drying process. The humidity should be kept between 20% and 40%. Again, the drier, the faster this will go. If it is higher humidity, it can take longer time, but be patient. 2 weeks or more is typical. Once you have the seeds dry, make sure that you are putting them in the right containers and storing them. And I will get to that in a little bit later in the presentation, but labeling them is absolutely crucial. I collect many seeds from many different species of ornamentals I work with, and it's remarkable how quickly you think you're going to be remembering all of them, and they end up being all over the place, and you're like, I cannot recognize this seed. Important information is to put down the cultivar name, the plant, of course, when you collected it, and the time and the year, so that if you end up storing for more than a couple of years, then you can go back and see when you collected it. Because say more than 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years for certain species would probably be too much. Here's the process illustrated for tomatillos, which are really, really cool fruit to work with. You remove the husks, that papery kind of outside layer. You put in a food processor, and the seeds are so tiny. Do not worry about any kind of damage that may happen from the metal spinner. It's not really going to damage seeds that are that small. And then make sure you pulverize it quite well. And then from there, again, you add some water. The seed pulp is going to be kind of rising to the surface of that container, as you can see here on the right. And all the good seeds are going to be at the bottom of the container, and they have been quite well cleaned up. So this is just really, really good example of tomatillo seed processing. Let's go over a couple of crops, so you could see those steps. When we're talking about tomatoes, we allow the fruits to ripen fully. We scoop the seeds along with the gel that surrounds them, put the seeds in the gel in a glass jar with some water again, uh, allow for that fermentation process to start again, mix in a couple of times, and over a couple of days, 72 hours at most, the mixture will ferment and the seeds will then be released from that gel around them, and they'll be heavier and they'll sink to the bottom. Pour off the liquid, rinse the seed, and then again that drying, and that should work for tomatoes. With peppers, we have a little bit of easier time because we don't have gel that surrounds the seeds, but we still do have that fruit wall that is surrounding. That's that red or yellow or even green pepper, depending on what you're growing. Allow those fruits to stay on the plants a little bit longer until they become fully ripe and start to wrinkle. This helps with drying in the field. Removing the seeds from the peppers and then spreading them out to dry will make sure that you have the seeds removed, and then the drying period over, you go ahead and store them. When we come to work with peas and beans, we'll allow the pods to ripen on the plants until they're dry and starting to turn brown, with the seeds rattling inside. As long as a month after the harvest can actually be a right time. Strip the pods from the plants and spread them out to dry indoors. Sometimes you can leave the fruit intact, and then right before you're seeding, you can then release the seeds. Dry for at least 2 weeks before shelling again, or leave the pods until you're ready to plant them. But working with beans is always fun. Herbs, I do a fair bit of work with herbs, and I really enjoy cooking with many different herbs. I've grown my fair bit of herbs. They're very, very easy to start from seed and quite easy to grow if you have the right conditions for them, which is about 6 times 6 hours of sunshine, good, well-drained soil, and just make sure that they get plenty of moisture, what they need. With herbs, the cleaning of the seed reduces the disease and the weed seed that can grow along with your selection. There are 2 examples of different kind of seed. This one is a dill, and that's the type flower. We call it umbel. The seeds are always on the little tops of those. So you would be removing those, you'll cut this below that inflorescence, and you'll take it and kind of gently strip the seeds off, and then discard any of the other surrounding material. On the right, you see a picture of basil with the seeds that have matured already, and some toward the top of the picture are still green, so they're maturing, they're not ready. So a seed will usually tell you by its color that it's ready to be harvested, and then from there on stored and ready to germinate for later on. We clean the basil seeds once we remove them from the flower. You can just strip gently that outer part of the fruit, and then the basil seeds are these tiny. They're pretty small, but they're not as small as some other seeds that you may run into. Maybe not on the fruit side, but think about begonias. If you've ever worked with begonia, the seeds are like powder. So the seeds are usually dark colored, but it could be lighter colored too, depending what we're working with. Basil seeds happen to be black. Once you crush that flour, the seeds will fall off, and you can just kind of like gently on a white sheet of paper on a bright light, you could really see that. If you're processing lots of seeds, we'll show you some other ways to work with them. With flowers, if you happen to have flowers, I work with flowers, so I talk about flowers a little bit more often. We do not deadhead those that you're going to be saving the flowers. You leave them on the plant so that they can ripen. Same principle applies, like you would be doing something with like pepper. You leave it, or a peas, you leave that fruit with the seed inside on the plant for a longer period so that the seed can mature. And waiting for the petals to drop and expose the dry seeds for depending on what you're working with, is a good rule of thumb. You can cut the entire flower. First method to remove the seed is to place in a paper bag and shake vigorously. And then the seeds usually are heavier and usually will pack really well down on the bottom of the bag. And then you discard that chaff, whatever else is left from the material. Method 2 is to spread on a paper towel and to rub gently. You can use tweezers to pick up clean seeds. I've sometimes used my fingers. They appear to have enough moisture to pick up the seeds, but again, it's going to be time consuming. That will be something for the kids to do and help you out with this. Get them to learn about nature and growing plants and their own food, which could be really great way to get them started. This happens to be the third method here that I demonstrated. Just have a whole bunch of seeds and you don't really care a whole lot to save every single one of them. You crush the dried flour in your hand and then you start transferring from one hand to the other and blow gently so that the lighter material will just fall off and fly away. And then you end up with the nice, clean, dry seeds. Seed storage is a very, very critical part of the process. You want to make sure that the seeds that you work really, really hard to preserve are going to last through the winter season, and then you can go ahead and get them started next year or the year after that. The best way to store your seed is to put them in a glass jar that also has a gasketed lid so that everything is really, really well preserved inside and no amount of moisture goes in and out of that jar. For small quantities of seeds, you can place each type in small little paper envelope. Again, make sure that it's well labeled, and then you can put and pack several in that glass jar. Again, make sure that you put in the type and the variety of the plant and the date of the harvest and anything else you may want to add, maybe the source, if a friend gave it to you, or it was it a commercial source, where it came from, and all that information. You may end up writing a little journal that you'll use, and it's really exciting to kind of like keep a record of your efforts. A good rule of thumb to determine if the storage conditions are appropriate is to put the sum of the temperatures in Fahrenheit and the relative humidity as percentage, and make sure that that combination does not exceed 100. For example, seeds stored at 45 degrees should not be exposed to a relative humidity that is greater than 55, because when you put 45 and 55, you'll end up with 100. So anything over that is going to go a little bit higher. And is one thing about seed longevity is water or humidity is the enemy of that seed. It was very, very important for the seed to have moisture while it is growing, and it is bad for it once it is dried, because it enters into this period of like hibernation, and that hibernation is water is not a good thing to have. The key to successful long-term seed storage is keeping those seeds cool, dark, and dry. If you store it where the air is moist, they will may sprout and or become mildewed, which is not going to be good. So cool, dry, dark place, closet or cupboard. Better, airtight containers in refrigerator. And best is to dry to 5 to 7% moisture content by weight, store several degrees below freezing. However, not many of us can be this precise or have these abilities. Problems with stored seeds, temperature variation, moisture fluctuation. If the weather is humid when drying, then you can help that by putting a little gel, a silica gel packet in the container with the seeds, but make sure you remove it after about 7 to 10 days, about a week, because there is such a thing as too dry, and the silica is much more strong in drawing water and holding it to itself. So that's why we just want to make sure that you don't leave it there for too long, but it can help. If after drying you see mold or mildew on the seeds, or if you happen to see any kind of sign of moisture on the inside of that storage container, then you definitely are having something to do with too much moisture. So using desiccant drying is a must to preserve those seeds. Insects is something that there's always going to be some kind of organism that is on the surface of the seed, whether it's an insect or some kind of fungi. Again, mildew is a fungi and it will start growing on them, but you may also have insects. And there's something to assume that there's always going to be some kind of insect present. You may not see it there, but it's probably there in some seeds that have been preserved from your garden. Freezing is the safest. It does not necessarily kill the insects, but it will not let them attack your seeds. You can also use diatomaceous earth and put it in the seeds as well. Animal pests, especially if you're having some large containers with seeds and you're trying to store it in an outdoor area or like a garage or something, make sure that you realize that all of these seeds are very, very attractive to lots of rodents, and those will be attracted and will attack it. So the tightly closed containers are important to counteract that. Again, light, heat, and moisture are enemies of your seeds. Seed longevity increases as the storage temperature decreases. A dry seed or pod shatters when bent or hammered. So how do you know that that seed pod is dry? Is if you're trying to crack it with your hands, it will actually shatter. It will open up. They will not bend. Plastic bags and containers are not the best moisture barriers. Refrigerator is too humid for the seeds that are in open containers. Again, if you have glass containers with gasketed lids, and then inside you may have some paper bags or plastic bags, that is better. But that regular refrigerator has a little bit more moisture that is good for the seeds. Because you don't want to put the seeds in the freezer until they're very dry. Until they're very dry, ice crystals do not form in the seed the way they do in fruit. Always let refrigerated seeds warm up to room temperature before opening the container. This way the crystal water does not condense on the seeds very quickly, and then all of your efforts in trying to keep those seeds all of a sudden dry, the moisture will get on them. So just bring them to room temperature before you start opening the container. We talk about how long you can keep the seeds. Say, 1 year you had a really great harvest and you ended up with quite a bit of seeds, so you stored a lot, and it happened to be a really good year. Next year, you may not have so much success, or maybe you were focusing on growing certain kind of plant. So you may want to know whether or not your seed from the previous year are still good. So this is just a general rule of thumb following, if you've done everything right and you collected the seeds and you stored them, how long can you expect these seeds to last? And this is a table here. So you see anything average between 3 to 5 years. So anything like 2 years is probably going to be safe bet that it will work. Same thing with 3 years, with exception of things like parsnip, for example, and okra and sweet corn. They happen to have only 1 to 2 years of longevity. One last thing I want to talk about is before you even try to put that seed that you stored out, you may want to find out what is your germination percentage, like what is the expectation that the seed is viable. And so I'm showing you a demonstration with little basil seed that I have shown you earlier. You place 25 seeds on a wet paper towel, just moist paper towel, and you roll it into a little paper burrito. You put it in a little plastic bag with a couple of holes in them, and just leave it to about 75 degrees. And check daily, and you take counts of those that have germinated on day 7 and a second count on day 14th. And this is what happens if you have good viable seeds. You can count that you have pretty good amount of germination, but maybe not 100%. There is one up there on the top row that does not seem to be going anywhere. But for the most part, the bottom row, with exception of maybe one, the second one there looks like it actually starting to swell up. So it may be just a little slow seed, but we almost got about, let's see, what is that? Count on day 6, 23 out of 25, 92% germination rate, which is good. This tells you that the seed is going to be just fine for you to grow. But that's just a quick and easy way to find out if the seed is viable. Once you see that the radicle, which is that part that will be the root, is showing up, it's poking out of the seed, chances are that seed is going to be just fine. You may not end up seeing anything green forming right away. That it needs light in order for that to form, but it can retain the germ, the actual plant, baby plant embryo, maybe a little too pale, but pale yellow, pale tan color, it's fine. As soon as it sees light, even for a couple hours, it will immediately start greening up. And this is really what a good germination testing, quick germination testing would show you. And with that, I reached the end of my presentation. So I would just say happy gardening. This happens to be the vegetable garden of my family in Florida, in Gainesville. And my brother-in-law is a great vegetable gardener. He grows anything and everything. I mean, I love going down there and seeing his garden. I don't do as much vegetable actually, I don't do any vegetable gardening. I don't have much space here in my house, but I do grow herbs, and of course I work with flowers a lot. So I'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay, if anyone has any question, you can put it in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and ask your question at this time. I thought, yes, Miss Mary.
Thank you, Ms. Kimberly. Ms. Bodie, are there any other herbs that you can plant from seed, like cilantro or even lavender? Can you gather those seeds? Because I planted those this year, and I'm wondering if I can save them to next year.
Well, thanks for the question. I know that the annuals, pretty much anything is like parsley, cilantro. These two are very similar. Celery, mustard, depending what you're growing. All of these could be very, very easily, grown from year to year. The parsley and the cilantro, they like to be a little bit more on the cool side. So, but yeah, I mean, they're very easy to grow. As far as the lavender is concerned, yes, you can save the seed. Lavender is a perennial plant, so it's going to take a little bit longer for it to grow into a plant that you can then harvest from, but it should it's a little bit more challenging because it requires a little bit more patience, but you should be able to save the seeds and grow it. Lavender is in the same family as basil and rosemary, oregano, mints, and they're, many of them are very easy to propagate from cuttings. So not just seeds, but cuttings. So I keep stuff kind of like around the house, just for it to smell nice. But you also can be forming roots while you're keeping them in a little jar with water.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I don't think there are any more questions, but I want to thank you, Dr. Panisi, for presenting this. I certainly learned something that I've always wanted to learn, and that is how to save the seeds from tomatoes. Now I know. So I'm going to give that a try for sure. But I thank you for the presentation. And to our audience, our next gardening series workshop will be on July 21st. And we are going to be covering composting. So we hope to be able to see you then. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you,
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.